recollect, that was during COVID, and things were kind of calm because we didn't, people weren't commuting as much. They were working from home, et cetera. So, and I arbitrarily came up with incidents that I believe that are top incidents in most towns throughout Cumberland County. These are types of calls we deal with all the time throughout the county. And I'm sure whether it's here at the sheriff's office or any police department, these are kind of the driving topics for most towns. So I took a look at property damage, accidents, domestic violence type incidents, and domestic assaults, and verbal domestics. So you can have a domestic violence incident, and we show up, and perhaps it's assault, perhaps it's a verbal argument, or perhaps it's just people who just can't get along and there's no arrest. So that kind of what you're looking at there. One of the things I really want you to look at as we move forward for the next 5 years is the mental health events. Back in 2020, the town of Gray, we responded for 58 mental health events, and we conducted about 886 traffic stops, arrested about 24 people just in the town of Gray for OUI, and then we had 4 overdoses. So, can we go to the next screen?
Yep.
There we go. And we're looking at the same numbers. As you can see, 2021, things are starting to open up, people back on the roads again. So your accidents are increasing. Your domestic violence are kind of staying the same, but there's a little increase there as well. People are trying to get out of the COVID. The mental health events jumped from, in my opinion, pretty substantial, to now 128 events. And the one thing to think about with these mental health events is when we're going to deal with these as a law enforcement officer, you're there for a period of time. It's not something you usually just show up and everything's all set and you turn around. Sometimes you're there calming people down, de-escalating, trying to make connections with maybe some people that mental health liaisons, et cetera, that can maybe help someone who's in crisis. Sometimes we're asking EMS to show up to maybe transport someone. Sometimes we're actually putting people in protective custody ourselves and having to transport them. So they're pretty timely calls, and they take a lot of time out of the deputy's time, day, 10-hour shift. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. So and then once again, operating under influence went up a little bit. 31 overdose, 3 came down a little bit, which is good. 792 traffic stops, which is pretty consistent. The next year, 2022. And the thing to think about, you guys have 2 deputies, and then you add that summer one. They're handling the majority of these calls, but granted, we do have another deputy that kind of floats around and covers calls in the towns of New Gloucester, North Yarmouth, and Pownell. So they're helping out too with this. But it's similar to Standish. We have another deputy that covers over in our District 1, Sebago Baldwin area, kind of helps out with that town. That stuff still got to go on because sometimes you just can't handle a situation with just one officer. So as we move forward, accidents, property damage accidents, once again, 235, domestic violence, domestic assaults, domestic arguments, a little increase there. Mental health, 145, staying about the same, but a little bit of an increase. Operating under the influence, once again, 51. Another call that really takes some time. By the time you investigate a call like that, you arrest someone, you take them to get tested, perhaps take them to jail. Very time consuming. And there's obviously a spike in overdoses there that year. But traffic violations, I think we had some good hitters over here. I think we probably had some real aggressive deputies over here, which I think that happens sometimes. Sometimes you get people that are just out there mixing it up, and obviously in 2022 that shows. So we'll move forward. 2023, 245, domestic violence 9, the assaults 19, high argument 41. These are all time consuming calls. Once again, mental health event 142, operating under the influence, people still not learning the lesson, 43, Overdoses came down, which is good, but, you know, our traffic stops was 1,045. We'll go on to 24. Pretty similar, but the really big distinction I want to make is the mental health event. Really, you know, last year we dealt with mental health events 173 times. That's a lot of times dealing with folks with mental illness or having a mental health situation. That's very time consuming on the deputies that are working over here. And, you know, I think that's something really notable that you really got to pay attention to. Now, what happens is the more time you're dealing with some of these other things, you know, you might not be stopping as many drunk drivers out there. So your calls for service on operating under influence is going to go down, things like that. Obviously, the overdoses we're going to respond to. Traffic violations, we still stopped a lot of people in the town of Gray or commuting through Gray, which, you know, you got, unfortunately, you guys are out there, you're driving all the time, you're seeing things that you don't like to see. We're trying to do the best we can with the staff we currently have. So the next slide, please. I know this is just gives you guys a good look at what we did last year in 2024, because I think it's important. You know, I know that I highlighted some calls, but there's a lot of incidents there that are time consuming, but it gives you a good flavor of what's going on in your town. Next slide, please. All right. One of the things that I told you about, you know, I want to compare the standards because, you know, obviously they do have a contract with us with 7 deputies, which is, in my opinion, a good number of deputies. It's substantial. They are paying just under 1.4 million, you know, so it's costly. It is costly, but, you know, you're seeing a lot of similarities here. If you look, your accidents, still the same, even with 7 deputies, because you just got the traveling public. Domestic assaults, they're still going to occur. The violence incidents, domestic arguments, they're pretty high over there. But you know, these are the types of calls we're gonna get called to no matter what. Those are the calls that people call in and say, "Look, I got a problem and I need some help." So, but really, what I wanted you to look at is the aspect that the mental health events in the town of Standish, where I have 7 people working, and it's 7 throughout the week. Not 7 all at once, obviously. You know, they had 72 mental health incidents. So the town of Gray actually had like 100 more mental health type incidents last year than the town of Standish. And we did it with 2.2 deputies and the floater car. And, you know, that's a big difference. That's a lot of man hours being used over here. And, you know, obviously, when you start doing the, you know, the workload analysis, you can see that the folks over here are really working hard, and they're virtually going probably from one calls for service to another, you know. Traffic violations, obviously, when you have more staff, you're able to conduct more traffic enforcement, which is good. Although operating under influence, I think they're starting to get the message over there, because if you're able to stop cars, obviously you're sending out the message. But we're not having as much luck over there with that. So. Next slide, please. I just give you a rough idea what their calls for service were as well. Next slide, please. And it just gives you a bar chart. You know, once again, the work analysis that I'm trying to, you know, to talk about. You know, if you're going from call to call, and you're a deputy, you're working over here, you're going to get used to saying, okay, you know, what's my next call? And you're going to have that mindset. If there's enough personnel working in a particular area, particularly in law enforcement, where some of that work maybe gets pushed off somewhere else, so I get this call and someone else gets the next call, then I can spend some time doing some proactive police work, like, you know, traffic enforcement, community policing, those type of things. So just kind of, once again, looking at year to year, the numbers by the numbers don't lie. And I just, can we just look at, I think the next one's a line chart I did. And once again, look, I mean, two towns, virtually, you know, the same issues, but you can see the mental health events. Clearly, you know, that's an issue. over here, and it's a very time-consuming issue. And, you know, that's one of the reasons why, when we talk about doing a workload analysis, that's really what we're thinking about, is the deputies over here. They're really getting tasked with a lot of work. And although it's up to you folks to decide whether you want to add another deputy or not, you know, you clearly have the need, in my opinion, that would support another deputy over here, or probably even two. But you got to start with at least one and move from there. So we know Rome wasn't built in a night, so we understand that process. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about the numbers, because I feel like sometimes people look at them, but they don't really know what's going on somewhere else. And, you know, the more cops you have doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to have any crime, right? But, boy, it's handy that you have more hands, you can do a lot more work. And right now, I feel like we're doing good work over here with the people we got. We're doing excellent work. But there's a lot more work over here we could do. So that's about it.
Thank you, Captain Joyce. I just had just a follow-up question that came to mind as you were presenting. This is really helpful to have as, you know, visuals in the numbers, because I know Mike was sharing with us that the numbers were the same, but it's helpful to have all that data. I guess I'm wondering mostly if we have approximately two deputies that work, I believe Wednesday through Saturday here they're assigned. And Standish has 7 deputies. What does that look like for coverage on a daily basis in Standish? Is it just one deputy every day of the week that they have for coverage?
Yeah, so they have 24-hour coverage, all right? And a majority of their day, their 24-hour day, is duplicated with 2 deputies, majority of it.
Okay.
Not all of it. When you get to like after 3 a.m., they go down to 1 deputy, et cetera. But we have other deputies that float the area. So like if there's an incident, you know, those deputies would respond, just like they do currently over here, so.
Okay. Did anyone else have any questions? Mike?
So my biggest question is response time.
Yes.
You know, that's where I'm more concerned with anything. You know, we had, you know, obviously, you know, we're crazy here in Gray from the south of it, which I've already known. You know, to justify the need, I need to know that, you know, we're not getting to other things, right? So has there been a response issue, you know, that because you mentioned, you know, it does take a lot of time to go to these mental health, you know. And then the other follow-up question to ask, so I might as well ask at the same time, is that are we better off finding somebody that can help with the mental health issue to go along with you guys? Should we be looking at that also?
Well, obviously, great question, because we're not, to answer the last question first, we don't have a mental health liaison. Some of the towns do. We are looking at avenues where we were gonna get involved with a group that's out of Portland to try to team up with them at no cost, which is good, right? But that process has been a little slow. It may even get a little slower now, how things are changing in politics, if you know what I mean. But so we're looking at that avenue. We've had times where we've actually looked at grants for that, and it got to the commissioners, and for one reason or another, it didn't go forward with the grant. So we're doing the best we can with what we get. Now, getting back to response times, if someone is dealing with an accident or mental health issue, right, that's your one person, your deputy. Now, you're hopeful that the other deputy that's floating these other towns, New Gloucester, Pownell, and North Yarmouth, is not busy, and they can fill in that gap, right, temporarily. And if they're not available, then we're bringing people across from like Raymond, Naples, Baldwin to assist. So depending on what day it is and where the stars line up, the times could be, they could be vast, you know. Fortunately, we work well with like Cumberland and Windham. We back them up and we assist them when perhaps they're tied up. The same with Windham. So if it's a situation where it's really active and we know we got some travel time, we reach out to our fellow PDs and ask for assistance when necessary. But we prioritize everything. So, you know, whatever looks like a priority, we're gonna answer first. And some of the other stuff, the incidental stuff, you know, I've got a speeder, you know, these type of things, these quality of life issues, they kind of go to the back burner. And maybe we'll get to it, or maybe we'll try to look at it the next day. I mean, someone usually follows up and at the end of that shift, or maybe goes into the night shift, someone will follow up. But, you know, those are the type of incidents that, you know, we get a lot of them, but we try to get to them when we can. So I hope that answers your question. I mean, the good thing, it's like the fire service. They have mutual aid, we do with the law enforcement service, you know. We went and assisted with Lewiston, you know, the Lewiston incident. So without that, you know, we'd all be in big trouble. But thank God we got that ability and we can do that. And we do that when we need to, so.
Madam Chair, if I may add.
Yep.
I think I gave an example at a recent meeting where I came across an accident in the intersection of West Gray Road and Main Street on a day that we didn't have a contract deputy. And so the deputy was coming from far away. And so 20, 30 minutes for a deputy to respond to that intersection when it's a pretty high traffic time, it was in the morning commute, you know, that's pretty disruptive to the community, that once that officer gets there and they can clear the scene and move things along. So those incidents could happen if the stars align, as, you know, as he talked about. And at this point, I think it's going to take a long time for us to get to have coverage like Standish, but at least if we could have one person assigned to the community at least close to 24 hours a day, then we may have better coverage. And again, that's not something we're going to do overnight or in one budget year. It's something that we're going to have to do over time. And I think Dan has a question.
Dan, yep. Let me go to, I'm going to go to Ann, then I'll come back to you. Go ahead, Ann.
Yes, thanks for your presentation. How many of the deputies in Standish are SROs? Any of them?
Yeah, so what happens with that is, not everyone's an SRO, right? We don't, for instance, Bonnie Eagle, they contract their own deputy, they have their own SRO. The deputy that's assigned to Bonnie Eagle isn't part of the Standish contract. So,
So the
difference
comparison
here-
is just patrol officers.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, everyone else is just patrol. So, for instance, when there's a snow day over there in Bonnie Eagle, and that deputy doesn't have to go to work because they're working, doing online school training now, or having a snow day, we use him or her elsewhere throughout the county where we need them to cover accidents, slide-offs, things like that. Now, most of the time, that isn't in Standish. Most of the time, that's maybe somewhere up like Baldwin and Sebago, because that's an area that we have a hard time, you know, once you go there, it's hard to get back across, you know, because you gotta go over a lake, or come around a lake, and it's problematic. So, yeah, so different from your SRO here, who is part of the town, where like on a snow day, they'd be out here helping out. And, you know, if it's a Monday, it's great. If it's Wednesday through, you know, they're doubled up, you know, at least till 3 anyways, so.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. And it really do appreciate your work, and you know, for me, feel like it would be helpful to get the data in like spreadsheet form. It's hard for me to toggle back and forth across multiple like PowerPoint slides, you know, in multiple years. And so I feel like I would, in order to make a more informed decision, I'd like to see the data in spreadsheet form, and including actually the monthly reports that we get from you folks, because it's really hard to keep track of trends the way the data are presented. And I also think it would be helpful to know kind of what percentage of calls you're not addressing because you're the deputy, usually just one deputy at a time, I understand, is on it and is working on a mental health incident or whatever it might be, and so can't go to another call. And I'm sort of curious what those numbers look like. You know, what percentage of the overall calls get unaddressed at any given month or across a year because we simply don't have enough coverage. It would be really helpful for me to see that. I also think that I kind of agree with Mike's question, is if the issue is mental health, it seems like we need a better approach to dealing with mental health incidents than perhaps sending out a deputy. And when I was in college and a little after, which granted was a really long time ago, I volunteered for a crisis intervention hotline where we sent mobile teams out into the community and transported people with mental health crises to the state psychiatric hospital or other private emergency rooms around the area. And those were incredibly effective. I mean, every once in a while it was scary and we needed to call in police backup, especially around domestic violence. But that was, it was a much lower cost to do it that way, and there were social work professionals who were available as well to go on more gnarly calls or to, to provide training and support to the volunteers. And I just, I know we're in a different environment, it's hard to get volunteers, but there are trained professionals that's what they do. And I feel like for maybe not all mental health calls, but probably the vast majority of them, having somebody show up who doesn't have a gun on his or her hip, might actually be able to de-escalate the situation a little more rapidly than an officer, just because of the uniforms you have to wear, And so anyway, those are just my thoughts. I feel like.
So can I follow up with you?
Yeah, sure.
Just so you're clear, like, for instance, you may call in with because you're complaining because you got a speeding car going, the speed is going across, in front of your house.
Yeah.
What I'm saying there is, we're gonna address that. Someone's gonna reach back out to you, but the problem is we may not be able to respond right then when the
Sure.
speeding's going on. So it's not like we don't follow up with you, so it's not like it never gets addressed. What we do is we'll pass that information on. The deputy received that and said, hey, Kerry Joyce reporting speeders in front of his house between 8 and 9 during commuter traffic. Try to do the best you can to get out there. The problem is the next day comes and you're still busy with calls, so it's hard to get out there. That's the point. I want you to understand, we do address them. People do get a call. It's not like it just goes by the wayside and we go, so just so you're aware of that.
Sure, thank you for that clarification. The other thing I would just note, and this is obviously much bigger than Cumberland County Sheriff's, is that I know it's possible to simply automate the speeding tickets, right? I mean, I was in Sweden a number of years ago, and it was all automated. I don't think I ever saw a police officer there, and we were there for 2 weeks, driving around the whole country. And if you exceeded the speed limit, there were cameras there that took a picture of your speed and your license plate, and you got a ticket. And so I feel like, I don't know, it feels like a lot of money to pay somebody to park and give people, and go after speeders. And it also seems like it's much more dangerous for you, for the deputies to be, on the side of the road, dealing with having pulled over somebody who was speeding. And I just wonder if that, if as a society, we ought to be moving more to that system.
Well, that's been talked about for years, right? So, but that's something that has to be done at even a higher level.
Oh, sure. No, I get that.
That technology's probably not cheap either, and it's all about the money, at the end of the day. So everything's expensive.
Yeah, sure. No, I get that. But I just I really am thinking of the safety of the deputies and just the ability to focus our resources on the things that need human intervention. Like a mental health incident or a domestic violence incident.
Just so you're aware, though, as much as the job is dangerous, it is dangerous. It's going to anyone's house is dangerous.
Yeah,
I hate to say it. Everyone's got a gun. There's a lot onto it. The job is very dangerous. If you get in this line of work, you kind of know what you get into. But on another note, because you are a person and you can go up to someone that you may stop for speeding, you may find something else. Maybe a human trafficking incident going on, or someone that's moving drugs, or things of that nature. Yeah. So you wouldn't necessarily you're going to maybe control the speeders, but you're still going to have these other activities going on out there, which are very common, although we don't catch a lot of these people because you just don't have the manpower to catch them all, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So takes investigative work, takes people, and if you need people to do that type of stuff. So.
Right, thanks.
Thank you. Dan, are you able to unmute?
Yes, Krista, thanks. And thank you for the presentation. There's a lot of information. I agree with Ann about getting the data as opposed to the reports. In fact, a couple of town managers back, we used to get the monthly reports as spreadsheet data. That sort of fell off over time, but it would be nice to get that information. I'm curious on the mental health and the domestic issues, obviously, protecting people's privacy. I'm wondering if you can let us know how many of those calls are repeat calls to the same person or address?
Mental health calls, without a doubt, we're going to the same residents multiple times. I'm sure if you talk to your fire EMS people, it's the same for them. Some of these group homes that have been setting up throughout Cumberland County, not just Gray, but throughout Cumberland County, we don't even know there's a group home until we get a call. So
Yeah.
it really is problematic, and we're dealing with it all the time. Sometimes, I think yesterday we were down on Lawrence Road, dealing with an individual on 2 occasions. So that's happening a lot. The domestics, I gotta tell you, I feel like the domestics, we're doing a much better job on domestics. I think the laws really helped us, the court system's really helped us. I really feel like the professionalism of law enforcement as a rule can identify when a domestic's occurring, and they're making the correct move, and they're taking enforcement action when they need to. So I don't think that doesn't tend to be a multiple return type call, but without a doubt, the mental health issues is a multiple response. We cannot put people into protective custody every time we respond. Every incident
Yep.
doesn't rise to that level. So
No, I appreciate the fact you're in a difficult position and that you guys are working hard to try and help these people. But I would like to have those numbers if they are something that we can get from you at some point. How many deputies does the sheriff's office have that aren't assigned to particular towns?
So right now, we have about 20, I'd say about 20 to 22 deputies that are what we call general revenue deputies. They're not assigned to a particular town.
And how many of the towns around us have contracts with the sheriff's office?
So right now, we have 5 towns in Cumberland County that have contracts, and then there's another 4 or 5 that have summer contracts.
And how often are our deputies called away to other communities?
It all gets back to mutual aid. I
Yeah.
really couldn't put a number on that.
That's not anything that gets tracked?
No, I mean, it's one of those things that, it all gets back to, you're out there to help. I mean, we go out on the turnpike. We don't really have to go out on the turnpike, but if there's a call for service out there and they're asking for someone to respond out, we'll go out there. So we don't
for
keep
sure.
track of that.
Okay.
In today's world, there's so few of you. You really kind of, all one team. And, I'll be honest, when I first started, I think that was an issue. My deputies somewhere else. But I think in today's world, it all works out in the long run. It really does. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that over time, there really has been a big improvement in the idea of mutual aid, and everybody's kind of in it together. Obviously we have, 5 major highways running through town. I bet us, the vast majority of the traffic stops probably are people who are passing through town, not residents of Gray. I think the state has been struggling with trying to come up with answers to some of these questions. How do you see the county, particularly your office's budget growing over the next few years? Are there any plans to add personnel or any other programs that you have on the horizon that you see rolling out to us or that you want to do for yourselves?
Yeah, I personally, this is what I foresee. I foresee a lot of towns really understand the importance of having their own contract deputy. It really gives you some sort of continuity to someone. That
Yep.
when you do have an issue and you're able to address it, like a speeding issue, you can reach out to Kerry. You know, Kerry's my deputy. I can reach out to him and say, hey, I got an issue over here. That's what I foresee. I sent out proposals for different towns, because there's a lot of people, I call it kicking tires, right? A lot
Yeah.
of people
Yep.
kicking tires, right? The one thing I can honestly tell you, it's not cheap. It's not cheap, I understand that. But I also know the aspect that, 5 years ago, it was a lot cheaper. Today, it's not as cheap. 5 years from now, it's not gonna be cheaper. It really isn't. Now, there is cop grants that are out there, and sometimes, we will get involved with cop grants. It's a federal grant, where there's money there to start kind of a seed program to start for an officer. So, like, for instance, maybe it's 50-50, the county gives 50 and the town gives 50, and then over time, the town will just take that and start paying it after that runs out over 4 years. I don't know the
Yeah.
specifics, but we've done that over the years for different, schools, et cetera. So that's one of those things, but those aren't always offered. And like I said, in today's times, I'm not sure what you're gonna get for federal funding, in the future here. So, that's always something you guys could always look at and say, hey, we might be interested in something like that. So,
Yeah.
there's certain criteria that you need, et cetera, so.
Yeah, we haven't met the income criteria, I think, in the recent past.
I guess that's it. Thank you again for
No, you're welcome.
for all the information. I appreciate it.
I did have one thing. First of all, I did forget to thank you guys. I really appreciate you guys. I know you guys are not only risking your lives, but your families as well, having to worry about you guys all the time. My question is this: if Monday and Tuesday we don't have coverage, and let's say we decide to add a third one, will we be guaranteed that we'll be covering the days that we don't have coverage right now? Because I don't want to throw in, it's another $100 and whatever $1,000, and then, covering the same hours that we're covering today. I don't want to do that. So I want to be guaranteed if we do decide to do that, that we'll be covering days that we're not doing. And the second part of that question, is there an opportunity to split that person with, let's say, I don't know what they do in New Gloucester, like shared like we've done with a lot of other things. Is that an opportunity as well?
So, the first, whoa, sorry about that. The first question, what we do is, if you hire a deputy, we look at the stats. We're not gonna send a deputy out here in the middle of the night when there's nothing going on, just to say, hey, we want someone. We look at the stats. Everything's by the numbers, I hate to say it, but we figure out, okay, we got someone working here, and it's covering because there's the demand for it, calls for service demand. So we'd naturally look at the numbers and say, okay, where would this deputy best fit the need of the town? And as well as our need as well. So that's not, it's a conversation between the town and the sheriff's office to decide where that deputy would go. To get back to your second question, I know that conversation's been kicked around, matter of fact, we just talked about it prior to the meeting. It always comes up, hey, could we share a deputy, so that you guys are in for 50%, maybe New Gloucester's in for 50%. But it all comes down to whether you folks in New Gloucester have a real good understanding of, hey, this person who's our deputy could be anywhere between here and there, You couldn't really have someone say, well, I know that deputy spent, 6 hours of his 10-hour shift up there, and we're short an hour, Those are the things that really have to be, those discussions have to be done town to town, I believe, We've had some islands, Sheboygan and Long Island, it's tough to get out there, right? They hire summer contracts, and that's one of their discussions. And what I encourage is this: we're willing to try to work with people, but really it has to go to the towns to have a really good understanding that if we're gonna do this, we gotta understand that, hey, if there's a fatal wreck, that person's gonna be tied up there all day and we can't be worried about it, or vice versa, or, an incident. So, you're right, yeah, those things could happen, but I really think that the towns and really have to have a great understanding. This is what we're trying to accomplish, This is the expectation, this could happen, we can't sweat the small stuff, really, so.
Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I just may add that I have spoken with both New Gloucester and North Yarmouth about interest. New Gloucester, unfortunately, is good with what they get. They don't have any contracts at all, so they just get the deputy that's patrolling around the few towns, the one deputy. But North Yarmouth has indicated interest. It's not something we've seriously talked about. I think if we were to expand coverage over time, that might be something to consider. If we propose to split our total costs, maybe 70-30 or something like that. We're partnering with them now on code enforcement, so that might be an opportunity to explore, and I would definitely explore that. But as far as scheduling is concerned, right now we only have coverage Wednesday through Saturday, and so based on how the sheriff's schedule works, and that's morning and night shift, morning and evening shift, it would be my recommendation that we would have eventually try to get Monday through Wednesday based on how their schedule works. So there'd be some overlap on Wednesday, which would allow the deputies to do training and take time off and things of that nature, so we would have coverage. But that would be the long-term goal. We did receive proposals from the Sheriff's Department. One of my recommendations, as we've handled with some other positions, is to maybe start the position mid-year. And so as part of the budget, I've put together a potential to start another deputy on January 1st of 2026. So it goes halfway through the year. We're able to as part of the budget, make the capital investment necessary for a cruiser and all the equipment, given that we had some of that in our budget prior, and we could continue with that in our budget this year, and then to add the half-year deputy with the goal of having that be a full year in the future. And then if the council wants to next fiscal year add another half year, then eventually we could get to having basically 4 deputies. The other thing I did want to mention, I know Harrison, which is a much smaller community than us, has 2 deputies, 2 contract deputies. So they have almost as much coverage as we do in their community that's significantly smaller and deals with a fraction amount of calls. So at the end of the day, I think it would be in the best interest in the community to have that coverage 7 days a week. But if the council doesn't want to consider that, that's something we can definitely talk about as part of the budget, or if I get kind of a straw poll today, whether or not to move forward with including it or not, I'm happy to take that out or include it. As far as I think the collective data, I share with the council the data that I receive, so the sheets that the Sheriff's Department staff provides us. So I don't have any aggregate data that they give us, so maybe I can work with the captain to see if they can aggregate that into a spreadsheet with all the calls for service from 2020 till now, so we can share that with the council. And I think Dan
Thanks,
might have
Yeah.
raised his hand.
Mike, or Levi, did you have?
I do, yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
I think when I look at this in the comparison kind of year to year, it seems like it's missing one extra piece, because I imagine there's got to be, at least for these particular, like an accident with property damage, there's got to be some kind of call response time tracked somewhere, for at least these ones kind of spelled out here. That kind of will show really that full picture of the difference between us and Standish. But even in its current form, it does seem definitely like 2 very similar communities, and obviously we have quite a less coverage.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this was dealt on, like I said, it's a workload analysis, not a response time analysis, which is, is 2 different things. Be honest with you, we don't pay attention to response time. When I hear a call come in, I'm just hoping someone gets there soon. And then I look and it's, wow, they got there, good. There's not many calls that we don't get there in a relatively good amount of time, or we have another department help us out, But we do not, we unlike the fire service, I think they're real good at that. I sit on some fire service boards. Matter of fact, they get it to the point where if you put the station here, your response time to a certain end of the town is here. And so they're way ahead of us on that. But point well taken, maybe we'll pay attention to that, so.
Thank you. Dan, did you have another question? Your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks, Krista. I meant to just add at the end of my other comments there. I haven't had anyone come to me and say they're concerned about the coverage that we have in town. And the few people that I have actually asked about it, their biggest concern is the cost. And I appreciate there's an inconvenience piece to it, as in Mike's scenario there where there was an accident and they had to wait. Obviously there's an injury, then EMS would be involved and that would be responded to much more quickly. But, convenience costs money. And at this point in time, we haven't seen Mike's budget yet, so I'm not sure, where that's going to land. But with what I know right now, I don't think I would support adding more of these services at this time.
Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
I just note that I just quickly looked up Standish's FY25 budget and compared it to ours, and it looks like they're about twice as much. So it sounds like maybe, I'm not sure why, but it appears that Standish residents have a greater appetite for property taxes than our residents do, and so I'm interested to see Mike's budget and look at the overall thing, but I am also nervous about cost, and I think I would want to have a much more in-depth conversation with the community about, kind of what Dan just said. I mean, cost and response time, cost versus, response time, versus efficacy, I don't know, just sort of what factors are they considering, or do they feel like we're undercovered? What's their appetite for paying more for more coverage? And so I feel like that's an important community conversation to have, maybe even as like an ad hoc committee, the kind of the way we did with the fire truck that time.
Yeah. Any other comments?
I might just add one thing. One of the things that I have heard in the little over a year that I've been here is I hear from a number of residents about traffic complaints.
Yeah.
So they don't complain that there's no law enforcement coverage, they just complain about the speeding cars, not stopping at stop signs, not stopping at traffic lights, all those different things. And as part of the last budget and as part of this budget, we'll be making investment in some traffic improvements. We have some speed recognition signs and things of that nature that will get installed this spring that we purchased as part of that. And so we'll do our best to add some of those. But I do hear from a lot of residents of concern about speeding cars. And I know they get a lot of the calls, but there's also people that don't call them. They call us because they're concerned about the pass-through traffic and things of that nature. So that might not be something that calls for the need of law enforcement, but if they had an opportunity to do more proactive policing, then if people realize, I think it's general knowledge of the community that Monday through Wednesday or Sunday through Wednesday, there's not a deputy around per se. Yeah, there's one patrolling a few towns, and that might allow people to make different choices in how they commute through the community and drive around the community. Whereas if we knew we had 24/7 coverage or close to 24/7 coverage, people might make different judgments if we have people enforcing. And then lastly, I forgot to mention earlier, as part of the mental health calls, it's definitely a serious matter a lot of communities are facing. And at another community I worked in, we, as part of the COVID-19 funds, we added a mental health liaison to get that started using those funds and then continue it in the budget. I do know our public safety departments deal with the same exact stuff that they do. So our public safety departments are responding to these mental health calls depending on the severity and the knowledge. They might wait for the law enforcement officer to get there. If not, they may be able to help. They have considered contemplating in a future budget potentially a mental health liaison that could be a town employee that we could staff and we could develop a schedule for that would work out of our public safety department. And so that's something we can definitely consider as well to supplement this without adding as much law enforcement coverage as Standish. And then I'll just quickly mention that as part of the budget, like I said, I have included for 1 year, but if there's no appetite, I don't want to include it in the budget to just have to take it out. So if there's no appetite, we've heard from Dan, I think he's not interested. I think Ann said she was unsure. If maybe just like a quick straw poll,
Yeah.
so I can make some final adjustments to the budget before I release it.
Yeah, we can do that. I just want to say anecdotally in response to your comment about how people don't really complain about the lack of law enforcement, they complain about the traffic. And I witnessed that. I'm a parent of school children who attend the school here right off Shaker Road. But there was a lot of issues beginning of the school year where people were not following the speed limit at the times the buses were arriving, the kids were coming in and out. And it was really noticeable that the sheriff's department made an effort to be out there in the mornings in particular and they were pulling people over regularly, and it really made an impact with the safety in that space. So if we can have people paying attention to those things on a regular basis, I think that's important. If we're going to do a quick straw poll, we've heard from Dan and I don't know if you have more to add, but I would be interested in at least seeing what the numbers look
Yeah,
like
me
as
too.
part of the budget. If I liked your idea of maybe phasing it in with the half year, and what that would look like. I think all of us are very aware that we'd like to keep our costs down this year. So perhaps if we have to think about where we could cut in other places to support this, if it's something, it would also be good to maybe kind of gauge where the community's at, like Ian was saying. So, but I would be interested in seeing some numbers. I don't know. Mike, do you have thoughts around that?
Yeah, I don't see the need yet. I do think it's possibly coming, but I don't think we have a need for it as of right now. I'm just more concerned about around our areas. I just feel like we will increase ours, and because next door doesn't, they know we'll pay for more, and regardless, they have to go. I mean, and I'd love to be able to work on, some of the other communities helping out, because, it's a shame that, they don't, and we're always the ones that pay more. I have not heard that the last few times it's come up about a police department, it's always been voted down. So I don't, from the people that I've talked to, I have not heard that as much of a concern as other things that I've heard lately.
Levi, what are your thoughts on exploring this as
Yeah, I'd like to at least explore it. I mean, I see, obviously, it's pretty much just steadily increased in terms of calls for service, and, I can definitely see how, even in comparison, they're way more stretched, which, I mean, it's anyone's guess without that last metric kind of showing the, response time aspect of it, how much that's affected things, but at the same time, I mean, that steady increase is hard to deny. So I'd at least like to explore it. And the half year, I think, is a good solution, so you kind of step up your budget that way.
Yeah. And you were on the fence. What was your?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, I want to see the whole budget.
Yeah.
I can't really make a decision until I've seen the whole budget.
Okay. So
And I'll just say I wouldn't be asking you if I didn't think the whole budget could support it. so.
Okay. Well, it sounds like the majority of us
yes.
would like to at least see some numbers to
Okay,
support that.
we'll put that together and share that with the council, the community as part of the budget. Thank you,
Yeah.
Captain,
Thank you for
coming
your
today.
time. Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Sheriff.
Sheriff, would you like to say
Yeah.
something? Yeah. Not to put you on the spot.
So a couple of
Sheriff Kevin
observations.
Joyce.
My name's Kevin Joyce, by the way, Sheriff.
Thank you.
Mental health is a problem everywhere. And unfortunately, some of the group homes, like has been mentioned, there's a lot here. In fact, some of the frequent flyers that are here end up in the jail, and I see the other aspect of it at the jail. And that's not a place for them as well. So that really is pushing the numbers over here. I've heard response time, and I'm kind of a numbers guy, but as much as I try to look at response time, and I thought that was kind of chic 10 or 12 years ago, there's a lot of factors. We're not like pulling PD, where you have 2 or 3 people on a beat, and if one person's tied up, you can try to figure out, okay, how quick did the other person get to the call? If the deputy is tied up at a mental health call, depending on that call coming in, they're probably not going to leave that mental health call, and somebody else is going to have to respond. So that's going to really distort response times. So I just think I've heard it a lot, and I'd love to be able to get that to you. I just don't know what those numbers, how we could break it out, because there's just so many factors, you got somebody on Egypt Road, and they need to get down to the Cumberland line, that's going to affect it, right? And you only got one deputy over there, so if you have one, that's going to affect it. And then lastly, I think a question was mentioned, if we added another one, do we lose anything? Right now, let's say you had nobody. You just had a deputy, like the deputy covering the 4 towns. I call that basic cable. Everybody gets it, nothing fancy. You share the resources. You've taken the step to buy HBO and Cinemax. And if you choose to buy another premium channel, you don't lose what you got through basic cable. You get it, because that's how we supplement. The only difference being is that if somebody books off sick, the contract deputy over here in Gray books off sick, North Yarmouth, Pownell, and New Gloucester are gonna end up with no deputy, because that deputy's gonna be pulled into Gray until we backfill. Because everything is, we don't have shift relief. So we're always working. Somebody asked about what is our goal? Well, shift relief, because we don't have that. Everything requires overtime. And the other thing that is our Achilles heel, as an agency as a whole, is investigations using phones and computers. You know, we've got probably 15 people statewide that work on those. But everyone has a phone and everyone has a computer. And as long as you have one of these, every crime involves one of these. So, you know, you'll often hear me talk to the commissioners and the public in the fact that, you know, that we need to start working on that. I used to be able to tell people you can investigate a theft or a robbery, but unless you're really good with one of these, that's criminal justice Achilles heel, both nationally and statewide and countywide. So those are kind of the things that, you know, we think about. The liaison, I just wanted to mention that. We are working with the Opportunity Alliance to try to get a liaison, mental health liaison. It was something that I tried several years ago, and I could go on, by the way, we don't have it, but, you know, eventually I think we're gonna have it. And we're gonna discuss it with the commissioners, I think later this month. My chief deputy is gonna bring it forward. So we'll have one. We really think we'll probably need two, because we're serving a population, a service population. If you add all of the towns that don't have police departments, that is about 9,000 less than the city of Portland. So our hope is to get at least one liaison. Ms. Glass, Council Gass, I'm sorry. I think I would never advocate for an individual going out by themselves without law enforcement. And I will say this because recently, in another town, the deputy was called for a mental health problem. That was it. It wasn't they were threatening, it wasn't that they were assaulting, it was just a mental health problem. And I kind of picked up on it, and I thought, geez, now we're responding to mental health calls. No crimes, but mental health calls. Come to find out, that mental health call was a pretty big individual that had assaulted somebody. And I guess my point is that we had an individual that may have taken the mental health liaison job. And they came in and sat with us, and that individual didn't want to go by themselves. And I said, trust me, you won't be. You won't be putting anyone in your car because there's a liability issue. We'll transport because there's a lot of things can happen. So I would just throw that out there because we are seeing what looks like mental illness can escalate so quickly that people ask, well, you know, the state of Washington has these responders that go out and they don't take the police with them. Bad idea, because all it takes is one attempt. And you'll see that they're reeling that program back as well. We don't want to go to mental health calls. Trust me, there are a lot of other things we could do. But as I stand here today, I would be reckless not to be standing here saying that mental health liaison responding with themselves, not with a police officer, is probably not a great idea. It's unfortunate that we're in the situation we're in. But anyway, thanks for letting me speak. We do value the contract, and if there's ever any issues, the captain is the point person, but you can call me. I do get those speeding complaints as well, and he ends up taking care of them. But, you know, again, we want to service the town. We want to make sure the town is getting what they're paying for, and we want to make sure that whatever we're putting out there is a great product. So I know you will, but let us know, because it's our reputation, and we want a reputation of giving you exactly what you're paying for. So thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
Chair. Yeah. Thank you both. Paul Johnson's here with us from Greater Portland Council of Governments, so move on to that. Sorry to keep you waiting, Paul. I know we went a little long.
He knew he had to wait.
I knew,
Okay.
I knew. The expectation was set, so I'm
Okay.
fine.
Thank you for being here, though.
Oh, no, yes, thanks for having me. My name's Paul Johnson. I'm the Director of Economic and Community Development at the Greater Portland Council of Governments. I've been up here, I believe, twice in the last year and a half. You probably saw me about a year and a half ago. I did a presentation on short-term rental enforcement and software. And then in November, I was the moderator for your state House and Senate races for the candidate night. So this is my third visit in the last year and a half. Just a level set Greater Portland Council of Governments for people that might be at home. We're a membership organization. So Gray, I believe, we charge about $2 a person to each one of our member communities. We have 25 member communities in Cumberland County. My guess is your line item is somewhere around $20,000 for Gray, is my guess. I did not look at your budget, but I could be wrong. But you guys at 10,000 people?
Yeah, it's per capita, and we
Yeah.
have about 8,500.
Yeah,
that's
so
about-
let's say it's $2.25 or $2.
Yeah.
So just to level set that, we do, our annual budget's about $6 million a year, just under $6 million. 65 to 75% of that is federal funding. 10 to 15% of that is member dues, which I would say is the money that is in your budget line item. And the other 10 to 15% are other sources or perhaps directly from the state of Maine. What the primary function of member dues is, it serves two primary functions. Number one, it helps us leverage federal funding and state funding. So a lot of times if we go and we say, listen, we have this project on, let's say, transportation or economic development or environmental protection or sustainability, a lot of that funding requires matching funds. So a big function of the line item in your budget is that we use those funds as, let's say, a 10% match to other much larger grants. So with that, I'll jump into what we do, and I have simple slides.
Yep, I've got your
Yep.
slides up.
And probably more importantly, what can we do for Gray? We try to do two things. We try to strengthen communities, and that's specific member services directly to our towns, our member communities, in this case Gray. And next slide. We try to connect the region. So it's a two-prong approach. It's one, what can we do for you? What can we provide to the town of Gray? But then we also pull the town of Gray in sometimes into maybe too many meetings, I'm sure, Krista. But we also pull our member communities in with their peers and have larger conversations about the region. So I'll do a quick rundown of some of our member services on the next slide. I'll give you some examples. Group purchasing is an easy one. I believe Gray utilizes GPCOG for group purchasing of salt. I believe we've saved Gray somewhere around the neighborhood of $15,000 per year. Then we also do grant funding and support. So this has lots of different facets to it. But some typical examples is if a community goes for a large infrastructure grant through the EPA or the EDA, we tend to be the liaison for that. We tend to have the regional plan that must be referenced in your applications. We also do, actually I'll stay on grant funding and support for just a second, but we also do, we assume the responsibility to try to make you guys more aware of some opportunities for you. Mike Foley attends Money Mondays every Monday at 9 a.m. It's me and Belinda Ray, and we take that opportunity. We do two things. We usually give municipalities a funding option, and we try to lay out, like, how easy is it to apply for this funding? Do you qualify? How much money is it? Is it worth your time? That's Belinda's side of the house, and then typically I'll do something that's more private sector oriented or opportunities for local businesses. Other funding that we have at GPCOG that speaks specifically to Gray. Personally, in the last year and a half, I've loaned money to 2 Gray businesses through our regional revolving loan program. One large loan, I believe it's somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000, and one smaller loan that was more in the neighborhood of $25,000 or $50,000. And that's, I run what's called our Regional Economic Development Revolving Loan Fund, and part of that is businesses, local businesses come to me. And we've put, for that, we've put $3 million in the streets for the last 2 years. And that's all directly as low-interest loans to businesses in Cumberland County. In addition to that, do you guys have brownfield assessment funds?
Yes.
Do you have assessment funds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Gray has assessment funds, as they should, and so Gray might use brownfield assessment funds to look at properties on, hey, how could these, what type of environmental remediation would be needed to redevelop these properties or to make them have a little higher and best use. Typically, the way that pipeline works is if you are taking a site like a gas station or a rundown place that needs environmental remediation, you all have some funds to assess it, to say, hey, this is how much it costs. GPCOG, I have $3.9 million in actually remediation funds. So the next step after interacting with Gray would be to interact with GPCOG, and I would give a low interest loan to a private developer, or I would give a grant to a nonprofit to then do that remediation work to complete the project. So you guys have like the perfect first step, and then once that first step is cleared, I would come in and say, hey, let me help you finish the project, so to speak. I know those are a lot of examples, but I'm just trying to throw some things at you. Third one, excuse me. Community engagement and communication support. We have I believe, a communication and outreach team of about 3 or 4 staff members. We oftentimes supplement some work for our communities if they're having a hard time with a specific issue in town, or even something around budget season, where they might come to us and say, hey, can you help us write this newsletter piece, or we don't have a robust mail list, or we don't have a communication director. A lot of times we can come in and supplement that for you. We do other staffing as well. A great example is New Gloucester right now. We're actually staffing their planning office. New Gloucester's had a hard time finding and maintaining a planner. So we actually have a GPCOG member that spends 16 hours a week up at New Gloucester in Town Hall as the planner and attends planning board meetings. And we don't do a ton of that, but we do have that ability to essentially interchange some staff members if you find yourself in a pinch. Data collection and analysis. I would love to take this opportunity. I know nonprofit websites are not super fun to be on, but if you look at our data library, there's something under the data library called our community profiles. And it is very rich and up-to-date data pulled directly from the census, directly from other sources. It gives you a great snapshot as an elected official to not only look at your community, but to look at a neighboring community or a comparable community like Standish to see if some of this stuff checks out. It's a super good, super easy to use website. Highly recommend that you use it if you've never stumbled upon it. So again, it's right under, its front page says data library, and then right under that is community profiles. In addition to some other data analysis, in the past year for Freeport and Gorham, we have presented essentially a fiscal analysis of different housing choices. So we have taken the Freeport budget, the current municipal budget, the current school budget, how it interacts with the state funding formulas, revenue sharing, education formulas, GA formulas, and we've actually modeled different housing development types and how much that actually affects the mill rate to the taxpayer. And we've done that for Freeport. We are done with Gorham, but we're not done with the public process with Gorham. So we've come in, we bring in a consultant, and we essentially try to break down, hey, if we had a 12-unit multifamily unit that's a half a mile from the town center, how much would that actually cost the taxpayer? How many students are actually in there, or could we expect? And we go in and we model that. That's a service that would typically cost you probably $50,000, $75,000 from let's say a national consulting company. We've been charging our member communities $5,000 because we do most of it in-house, and then we bring in one contractor. And so that's something we offer. We actually have it in a pipeline for several other communities as well. And I think is this the last bullet, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And the last bullet is housing, land use, and climate planning support. We actually have
one more after.
Oh, there is? Okay. We do have, actually, I'll just put a pin in that because we have a couple things we're starting with Gray eminently. So I'll explain those after that. And the last one is?
Meeting facilitation.
Yeah, meeting facilitation. So as I mentioned, of course, free of charge. I think Mike emailed us and said, hey, can you get somebody up here to moderate our local elections or our state elections? And we were here. We love to do those sorts of things. Just this past month, we were in Scarborough. we facilitated the council goals session, right? So the town council in Scarborough, I think roughly had 25 goals. We spent a couple hours with Scarborough, helped them kind of narrow that down with, hey, what are our actual, we got 25 goals, but what are the top 5? So that's the type of facilitation we do. We just held a crisis management facilitation up at GPCOG for all our member communities about, hey, what happens if we, God forbid, had another mass shooting or we had another catastrophic event where communication is paramount to your residents. We just held that, and we have a follow-up one that's not crisis communication, and it escapes me which one it is, but we have another one coming up as well. So essentially, what I'm trying to lay out is we like to call ourselves a Swiss Army knife. A lot of times, we're an organization with a long name and a confusing acronym, and a lot of times, a lot of people are like, hey, what do these guys do? And hopefully, if I did my job, I convince you that we can do almost anything if you just ask us. So that's why we like to use the Swiss Army knife, analogy here. I will mention, Krista, did you go chairs in a circle? Were you there?
Not this year, I wasn't able to.
Okay, so
I have been.
did somebody go from here?
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
perfect.
maybe not this year, but in
Not this
previous
year.
years.
We've been in past years.
Yeah, so we had a chairs in a circle. We actually, so this isn't me throwing shade. We had 34 people show up to our last chairs in a circle meeting. And we had almost, I think it was like 17 communities. And what we actually handed out to everybody was their property tax burden compared to their ability to pay. And we actually compare that to every other community in Cumberland County. So we could all level set about, hey, what is our property tax burden compared to our neighboring town? But also actually comparing it to our household median income and our ability to pay. But what came out of that meeting was something GPCOG doesn't do very often, but we will actually be starting a working group to see how do we actually be more, how do we help our communities become a little bit more unified voice when actually lobbying and trying to influence some of the decisions in Augusta around property tax relief, issues such as possible local option sales tax, which has been around forever but never gets any legs, homestead exemption. The MMA does a phenomenal job, but they represent 550 Maine towns, and more there's southern Maine issues, so to speak, and our member communities are starting to say, hey, can we get some sort of vehicle to perhaps have a unified voice? That's still in the works, but there's an example of something that is happening as a result of that. And then right now we are starting this, and I'll forgive me because I'm not 100% sure where the funding sources are. There's some different funding sources, but we have a housing needs assessment in the pipeline. GPCOG is providing a data-based analysis of demographics, economic, and building trends in gray, and we produce a report for you. If you're interested in the report that we produce, Wyndham and North Yarmouth have both received this report. Wyndham's received a very robust report, and North Yarmouth is probably going to receive something that would be comparable to what I think Gray will get. It's all public information, of course, and it's all been within the last 3 months, so if you do a little snooping, you'll be able to see that product that we will produce for you. And the second thing that we have is land use ordinance analysis. We haven't started. I believe we're starting within the coming weeks. We're going to be reviewing your zoning, site plan analysis, subdivision ordinances to identify potential barriers to housing production. And to be clear, when we do this as a third party, dispassionate party. We're not going to march into town and tell you you have to build more multifamily housing. What we are going to do is just give you a third party analysis of the current ordinances of how they stand. You're the elected officials, you're the decision makers. You can take that information however you see fit. And I think that is collective purchasing. I mentioned that's just that $18,300 is what we saved Gray last fiscal year in collective purchasing for road salt. And with that, I would take any questions.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
Yep.
Anyone have any questions?
I just want to say that I really appreciate GPCOG's work. I've known
thank you.
GPCOG for 36 years, something like that, and you've been there throughout for the towns, and I love your Swiss Army knife analogy. I think that really works, and really appreciate the focus on regional planning and sub-regional planning that you've been doing in recent years. I think that has really worked, so.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I can't take credit for most of that, but thank you.
Sorry.
I think we've been better utilizing some of the resources that GPCOG offers, you know, more recently, especially since Mike's joined us. Because we have Resiliency Fellow that was assigned to
Yep.
Gray this
Yep.
year, and Ann participated on some Vision Zero work
Yep,
for
I saw
rural
your sticker,
communities,
yes.
and-
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I think that's, like Ann said, just the work is really valuable. You bring a regional lens to the work we're
Yep.
doing and just serve as a resource, so that's really phenomenal. I just wanted to mention regarding the needs assessment that you're going to be embarking
Yep.
on with Gray. For those of you who don't know, or people watching, I serve on the executive committee for GPCOG, and we had a presentation about some of this work at our most recent meeting. Other members on the committee had this work done recently, and were saying how valuable it was, and just working on their budgets and just assessing the needs in the community. So I'm looking forward to seeing
Yep.
that. And then in regards to the land use ordinance, I think I mentioned this to Christina at our meeting, but we are also redoing our zoning right now, and so I just want to make sure, this is more of a comment for you, Mike, that we include any updates that we're doing in any kind of future setting for in this work, in this analysis. So.
And Krista, you said that at the exact, I
I
brought
did,
that right
yeah.
back to the senior plan.
Oh, okay,
so,
great.
yeah. And I will mention, actually, as a side note, the
Yeah.
ordinance review we're doing is because Gray has so many brownfield, let's say you're brownfield intensive, they might be small, but you have a lot of them.
Yeah.
We actually are using brownfield funds, so that's why there's no direct charge to the town of Gray. I have some flexible funds that can be used for planning work around brownfields and not directly. So the good news is there's an example of, on the back end, us saying, hey, we actually can provide that ordinance review for you guys free of charge, and we're doing it, and we're billing it towards a brownfields program. The second one, the needs assessment, I believe is going to be part of the housing opportunity program grant that is coming down from the state. We should have a decision on that by mid-March, so probably in the coming weeks, we'll know if that is 100% funded. So.
All right, that's great context, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, Mike?
I just wanted to mention that the total cost that we have for GPCOG membership is a little over 18,000.
Yeah.
That's per capita, as they mentioned, and that's based on the last census. So that will stay close to that figure, otherwise of what the budget increases on an annual basis. And then just mention that, you know, those programs that Paul mentioned, in addition to the Resilience Fellow, as well as we're part of the Community Resilience Partnership Grant, where they're going to try to help identify resiliency opportunities here in the community.
Forgot about
Whenever I see an opportunity with GPCOG that fits within the goals established with the council, such as the housing and the ordinance review and things of that nature, I be sure to express our interest and participation. And they don't have a ton of communities that promptly respond to them,
Yeah.
willing to participate. So they're grateful that we're able and want to participate. And these are all things that we just don't have the staff to do or the resources to do, and we're able to. So Paul mentioned like 18 grand. Well, I think we're closer to probably 100,000 in around the 24-month period, with all the benefits that we'll
Yeah.
get.
The value
Yeah.
of GPCOG between the Resilience Fellow and all the other programs we're doing. So I always try to think of GPCOG and always try to see what kind of resource they could be to help the town.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was fun. I didn't make the slides because I would take issue with it because of the Resilience Fellow and the housing. I think I have for Brownfield's budget. I think we're budgeted about $20,000, you know, of our staff time to bill for your ordinance review as well. So.
Yeah. Dan, you have a comment?
Yeah, just really quickly, I want to thank all for coming. I think, just echoing what other people have said, GPCOG has been a great partner and resource for the town. And thanks to Michael. Michael, I think, is very well tapped into these kinds of sources like GPCOG. And it definitely has helped councils over the years leverage the value of the tax money that we collect. We've gotten maybe one of the best investments we've made, I think. So thanks to both of you.
Any other comments?
No
Thanks.
questions about federal funding?
Oh,
I'm disappointed.
Oh.
that's a
I
constant,
mentioned it
yeah.
at our meeting last, so I know it's being worked on. And I was going to give an update that some of the funds that had been frozen were
Yeah.
you have access to them again.
Yeah, and the only
So-
thing I'll say is, look, to our Christina Egan, who's our executive director and has been for about 8 years, I believe. We used to be 90% federal funding, and it used to all be transportation dollars. And now we're 65% federal funding, which sounds like a lot, but it's through about 4 to 5 to 6 different federal entities, and then different programs within those entities. So the good news is, regardless of the political climate, we are very diversified, even though it sounds scary. And so we expect there to be some adjustments to be made. But the foresight that they've had over the last, or Christina and the committee has had over the last 8, 10 years has made a huge difference as far as us weathering any storm. So I just wanted to publicly.
Yeah,
It's
thank you
worth-
for
it's
raising
worth
that. Yeah,
saying,
that's a good point. Yeah. Okay. All right, thanks for joining us, Paul.
That was it?
Appreciate it.
All right,
Yeah.
awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks a bunch.
All right, and we will adjourn our workshop at 6:52 p.m. and we will reconvene at 7 o'clock for our regularly scheduled council meeting, which is available in a different link on the agenda on the website. Thank you.
You guys have a meeting after?
Yes.
Yep.
And then an executive session.
Oh, it's a short night.
Yeah.
Good evening. Welcome to the Gray Town Council meeting of March 4th, 2025. This meeting is being held in person and online with the link provided in the agenda header, which is available on our website. I'll begin with roll call. Councillor Gass,
Present.
Councillor Robinson,
Present.
Councillor Johnson,
Present.
Councillor McGuire, Dan, are you able to unmute? Okay. Yeah. Councillor McGuire is online, and we'll get his mic fixed momentarily. I am Councillor Chappell, and I'm chairing this evening as Dan is remote, and so I'm just filling in temporarily. If everyone could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, looking for a motion for approval of the February 18th, 2025 regular town council meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Is anyone opposed to, well, first of all, does anyone have edits?
No edits.
So is anyone opposed to unanimous consent? None? Nope, okay, seeing none, that passes unanimously. And I will move on to council communications. Dan, do you have a report?
He can't hear
Or he
us
can't
at the
hear.
moment for some reason, so I'm
Okay,
trying to see if I can.
we will come back to that and move, and I'll loop back around to report on council chair, and then we'll move on to council correspondence and committee reports. Ann, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So let's see. Sorry, I didn't have it right in front of me. Yeah, so Open Space meets next week. Steve McPike, a Gray resident and active with the Royal River Conservation Trust, will be our guest speaker. Resiliency is making progress on the first video script, and on the phosphorus ordinance, we should have a video ready to roll out to residents in the next week or two. I just wanted to update the council that the Resiliency Committee members decided several months ago, like 6 months ago, to begin, as we looked at the phosphorus ordinance, to start kind of big, pie in the sky kind of, big blue sky thinking, and apply a 2,000-foot buffer on the phosphorus ordinance to lakes, streams, and major wetlands. When this 2,000-foot buffer was mapped, it showed that it pretty much affects the entire town of Gray. There's some small pockets where it doesn't affect it. And, you know, while some people might make some arguments that that's appropriate, we're working with code enforcement now to see what a reduced geographic requirement might look like. Something between 250, which is our current shoreland zoning, and 2,000. So we'll see how that kind of shakes out. The watershed management planning work continues. Resiliency Chair Sandy Carter and I met with Gray Water District Executive Director Bill Gardner and a board member of theirs, as well as Chief Elkanich, to discuss emergency planning kind of broadly and more specifically the recent boil water order and ways to improve a coordinated response should something like that happen again. One suggestion was to begin a campaign to encourage people to download the app Code Red onto their phones, and that allows a notice to be pushed out in the event of any emergency, whether it's Gray Water District or something else. It was a very productive, very cordial meeting, and Gray Water District and Fire and Rescue will meet again to do more in-depth planning. So a lot of good ideas surfaced from that. There's no CTAC meeting this month. I'm sure Mike will talk about this more, but the NBOT held a meeting last week to update us on their engineering work on the VTP. Really exciting meeting for me personally. They had 2 engineers present from HNTB, their consulting engineers, as well as and a couple of principal group consultants were there. And they told us, you know, talking again about federal funding, that they've been advised to proceed under the assumption that US DOT money will be available, and that Gray, I think I heard them say that Gray is top of MDOT's list for this. So that's one of the reasons I was really happy. And I was also pleased that Steve Landry, he's a traffic engineer for MDOT, called for sort of more robust traffic calming measures in the village. So nice to have DOT on our side of things instead of resisting that. And they anticipate having some future additional in-person public meetings on the design, possibly beginning this summer. So anyway, good progress on that. And the Libby Hill Road Public Safety Project, by mid-March, we should have submitted paperwork that will allow us to begin drawing down on that CDS award so that project can start moving forward. Correspondence, I received an email from a resident inquiring if the town loses substantial state and federal funding, the council would raise taxes to cover those shortfalls. I said it would be very unlikely that we would, and that we would review the entire budget and there would likely be cuts if we, lost significant funding. But at this point, certainly federal funding is not a significant portion of our operating budget. This person also suggested that perhaps the town could, like the state of Washington, simply mail absentee ballots out to every Gray voter. Sort of an interesting idea, but I'm not sure Maine law permits it. And in any case, it would add considerable cost since we'd also run our usual in-person voting processes. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Dan. Before I move on, is Dan able to hear us
Yes.
now? Okay.
Yep, he should be able to hear us and speak.
Dan, would you like to circle back to the chair report right now, or should we just
No,
move
you can
on?
just keep going, Krista. I don't really have anything extra for the chair
Okay.
report
I'll
tonight.
just-
Thank you for checking, though.
Sure, I'll come back to you for correspondence in a sec. Levi, would you
Yep,
anything to report?
okay, so the Dry Mills Schoolhouse Committee met. For the Blueberry Festival this year, there's really going to be an increased efforts to involve and inform parents about the Dry Mills Schoolhouse and kind of drive that community involvement. And the other thing I wanted to mention for them is they're always looking for period-specific 1890s items that would complement the schoolhouse's museum feel, and just note that they would receive the utmost care. Rec committee canceled the meeting last night, so it's rescheduled for April 7th, and that's going to be in person.
Great, thank you. Mike?
ZBA has not had a meeting yet, and the Finance Committee meeting is on the 18th. So, and I had no other correspondence.
Okay. Dan, would you like to report out?
Thanks, Krista. Yes, I think most of us, or some of us, may have been copied on an email from Al Palmer about Doug Webster, complimenting him on his presentation and the facilitation of the zoning workshop. Al said he thought the presentation was professional, informative, and very helpful. And I unfortunately, because of other commitments, didn't get to go to any of those workshops, though I had wanted to. I'd like to thank Doug and all of the town staff that were involved in creating the workshops for our residents. The work will continue in their efforts to realign the zoning with the comprehensive plan, and I think this has been really positively received and really helpful to furthering the whole process along. The planning board will meet on March 13th. The only item on their agenda is the public hearing for the private solar energy system performance standards, which has gone back to the PB for a public hearing after the changes that we made. And the zoning board of appeals has a meeting scheduled for this March 26th. And that's all I have to report. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. I'll just do a couple highlights for my own stuff. As Dan mentioned, the last zoning workshop was held on February 24th, and I was actually able to attend that one. I hadn't been able to attend the prior two. But as Al reiterated to Dan, that it was very professionally done. It was pretty well attended. I think there were about 30 people there for the town-wide presentation. There's a lot of really good questions about impacts to shoreline zone and what kind of development would happen in these new zones and what that looked like. And I'm sure Doug will take all that feedback and compile it for the council at a future workshop, which I believe is happening in April. The Ordinance Advisory Committee is scheduled to meet again on March 10th, where we'll be reviewing all that feedback from those workshops and giving any further input for Doug to present, as I mentioned, in April. The Greater Portland Council of Governments Executive Committee met on February 25th. We actually focused quite a bit on the state of federal funds coming into GPCOG, and we had some good news that some of the prior funds that had been frozen, that they didn't have access to, they did regain access to. So they're not, I think currently there's only one smaller grant that has been canceled, a $300,000 grant for energy efficiencies and home improvements. But other than that, the larger grants that they were worried about, they did retain access to. There was one EPA grant in particular. And we did have a conversation at the committee meeting also about harbor masters on lakes, which was sort of just impromptu. And I mentioned that we had been approached by residents about that probably a couple years ago, about some mooring issues on Little Sebago Lake and their concerns for perhaps creating an ordinance around that. At the time, we didn't pursue it because, like many communities, we don't really have the capacity to enforce any kind of ordinance around that. But the county government representative there, Jim Gailey, mentioned that the sheriff's office does have a marine patrol resource that we might be able to tap into. He wasn't sure what that looked like for inland lakes, but I thought I'd mention it in case it arises again. And the Wild Blueberry Festival Committee is also scheduled to meet on March 10th. They're just back to back, so I'll be attending both. And that's it for me. I do not have any correspondence to report out on. So I will turn it over to our town manager, Michael Foley, for his report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a brief report. Just want to remind everybody a table talk with the town manager that occurs on the first Monday of the month. We had our meeting, the gathering last Monday, met with a couple of residents who came and went from the store. Didn't plan to come speak with me, but talked to them about things affecting the community. But I want to remind everyone about that. Again, it's the first Monday of the month from 12 to 1. The next one will be on Monday, April 7th. And our friends at Two Moms are offering free coffee for anyone that comes during that time. So be sure to come and check it out. And also want to remind everyone, you don't need to wait to come to that time to talk with me, that I can make an appointment anytime, any place, and willing to adjust my schedule to accommodate meeting with anyone who'd like to discuss concerns or feedback for the town. And then wanted to let everyone know about some open positions we have in the town. We have positions at the transfer station that have recently become open. We've had some firefighter EMT positions that have been open for quite a while, and then some recent positions that are becoming available at the library. So if anyone knows anyone interested in those, check out our website, as those opportunities, website and Facebook, those opportunities will be posted in those locations. And then just want to remind everyone about the zoning feedback workshops that we had, that a few others have reported on. The Dry Mills, Libby Hill, and townwide ones have taken place. And the town council is going to hear a report out from those workshops at our April 1st workshop before the town council meeting at 5:30. And then just want to remind everyone about our budget review schedule. We held a public input session on February 4th. We hope to deliver the budget to the town council on March 6th of this week. And we have town council budget workshops on March 11th and March 18th, where we will review the various budgets and departments. And then on April 1st, at our town council meeting, we'll have a report from the superintendent about the MSAD 15 budget update, as well as a public hearing on the draft budget warrants. And then on April 15th at 7 p.m., we'll hold approval of the annual budget warrants. And then we have a referendum town meeting taking place on June 10th, which is election day, where folks will be able to vote on the budget warrants, the school budget validation referendum, as well as some open positions that are available in the town. And lastly, just want to remind everybody about the grant partnerships we had. Paul mentioned this evening with GPCOG, the Community Resilience Partnership, the Housing Needs Assessment, and the Land Use Ordinance Analysis. But I also wanted to let everyone know about another grant partnership with the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development, the Housing Opportunity Program grant. I had submitted a grant application back when I first started here, back in early 2024, that they had a snafu with the awards, and we were just awarded $50,000. And this
Wow.
would be to support our village transformation project and the work that we're doing, primarily around evaluation of wastewater feasibility.
Great.
So we had planned to fund our wastewater feasibility study, which RFP, which is going to be going out through some of the funds that have already been allocated for village transformation project review, but this will be able to supplement those with that. So excited to be able to have those additional funds to save the other funds for other more priority
Yeah,
things.
that's great.
And then lastly, I just wanted to mention, we were informed today that community member Mary Sweeney Underwood passed away. We don't know any details of services, but we hope to be able to participate in that as the community and potentially find an opportunity to recognize all the great work that she did in the community for the short time that she lived here. And then also Ordinance Advisory Committee member Larry Zuckerberg also passed away. Zuckerman, I'm sorry, also passed away. And I was just informed of that today as well. So unfortunately, 2 dedicated community members lost. If everyone could just join me in a brief moment of silence as we honor them. And that's all I had, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, it's really unfortunate news about
Yeah, big losses.
passing those 2 individuals.
It is sad. Thank you, Michael, for calling our attention to that, though. I really do appreciate that.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Okay, so I'll move on to public comments of non-agenda items. Limit 3 minutes per person. The public is invited to address the council on any item of business not on the agenda for tonight's meeting, and there are some rules related to that outlined in our agenda. There is no one online, I believe, but we do have someone here in the audience. Would you like to come up?
My name is Lacey Atkinson. I live on Lake Avenue in Gray. It is about Mary Sweeney Underwood. So for people that maybe don't know her very well, I'm not going to really go into it, but she's also known as the woman who walks. And from her own passion, she got many, like 100 or maybe 200 people in town and other towns to take up Nordic walking. And she's worked a lot with Anthony in the Gray Record Department. So last year, we had this idea that that our town should have a walk, like a formal walk, not a run, because we don't have good system to run streets that would make a decent path. But we have all these Gray Network trails in the village. So sadly, but maybe in a good upbeat way, we'd like to have a walk this year and tie it to Mary Sweeney in some name or something, and have it held the day of Community Day, so in the morning. So using the trails, figure out a path that would make sense, promote Nordic walking and stuff like that. So it's not a cost thing, it's just a recognition that we might need traffic safety on the Route 100 and maybe Anthony to help and things like that.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great idea. We
It's a
can
lovely
definitely
idea.
toss that around
So
in terms of organizing, but yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what it was.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you, Lacey.
Thank you, Lacey.
Yeah, yeah. There's no one else in the room, so I will close public comment at 7:19 p.m. And we can move on to old business, which I don't believe we're taking any action on this
No,
evening,
so
right?
that can
Okay,
remain
right,
tabled.
Okay, so the old business, which will remain tabled, is order number 2425-12, addition of private solar energy system performance standards to the zoning ordinance. And we will take that up again, I believe, at our next meeting. And so I'll move on to new business. Looking for a motion for Resolve 2425-21 to designate Gray Community Day. The motion would be it resolved that Graytown Council hereby approves the designation of the third Sunday in May to be known as Gray Community Day. Do I have a motion?
So move.
I'll second.
Okay, Levi motioned and second. I'll open it up for discussion. Does anyone have thoughts or comments? Okay. I'll just say we've been hosting this Community Day for the last 2 years. It's been very much a grassroots effort. Lacey and some other members of our community have been organizing as kind of a complement to the Gray Wild Blueberry Festival. It's an opportunity for community organizations and committees involved with the town to potentially recruit interest for members or volunteers. There's been a lot of children's activities. There's been a chili bake-off, and I think it's been pretty well received. I think last year the weather wasn't amazing, nor was the year prior, but hopefully if we continue this, we'll have some better weather this year. I don't know, Mike, did you have any context for why we were
We had
designating
received
it?
a request from a member of the committee, I think Lisa, had submitted a request to the chair as well as the town clerk. And so in consultation with the chair, we had this put on the agenda for that designation.
Okay. Just a question. We don't currently have a formal committee that organizes this. So if we designate it as a formal day, we might want to have a conversation as a council about what that looks like for supporting the work, because it's been pretty informal the last couple of years.
Yeah, if I may, I think it's been kind of a subset of the Blueberry Festival Committee,
Yeah.
like you said. So maybe if the council so chooses and the committee is willing, we could maybe change the committee name to Special Events Committee, or we could put both names of the events for the committee or something like that, rather than form a whole other committee, because they
Yeah.
seem to kind of overlap.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Anyone have any?
I think Dan had something.
Oh, Dan, did you? Sorry, I missed your hand. Go ahead.
No, that's okay, Krista. Yeah, I mean, the organizational piece, it's come together the last couple of times. I think we'll be able to address that one. I think it's a great idea, to be honest with you. Designating the same day just makes it easier to build momentum and get people thinking that third Sunday in May, there's something going on in town. So I thought it was a really good idea to propose this. I'm all for it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for that context. Yep, go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, and I really liked Lacey's idea about having a walk that
Yeah.
morning for Mary Sweeney Underwood, but having it Gray Community Day that day, it does kind of open the door for other groups to organize maybe other, corollary events and in the morning or at some other time. So I just think it's a great idea to designate that day, and we'll see what materializes.
Right. Okay. So I will, if there's no other comments, I will go to vote.
Do you want to take any public comment?
Oh, do we need a public hearing for this?
Well, there's public comment on any item.
Oh, I forgot we were doing
Yeah.
that now. Sorry, apologies. Okay, we have one attendee. Is there any comment on this item from people in attendance? No. And there's no one online, so
No.
I will close that public comment for this agenda item. All right, and I will go to vote. Mike?
Yes.
Levi?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
I'm also a yes. Okay. Thank you, Lisa, for raising that as a suggestion. Okay, I'll move on to Order 2425-16, amendment to the personnel policy. Looking for a motion, be it ordered that the Gray Town Council hereby approves the personnel policy as recommended by the town manager and human resources director.
So move.
Second.
Okay, and moved, Mike seconded. So I will also open this up to public comment before we get into conversation with the council. Would anyone like to make a comment? Okay, I will close public comment. Mike, do you want to just give an overview of what we're...
Sure. We've spoken about this a couple of times, once in May of last year, and then most recently at our last workshop, receiving feedback from some of the proposed changes. Our HR director, John, has really done an outstanding job to try to make sure all our policies are in line with how we operate, federal and state law, and with other policies that may be separate from the personnel policy incorporated. So we've worked on a number of these, most of which the council has been in general support of. We had some concerns at our last meeting about the nursing mother support, which we had some updated language that I consulted with Councilor Gass, who was concerned about that. That seems to kind of meet the appropriateness for the future. And then we also had received some feedback about our education reimbursement policy, and we worked on trying to maybe step that down. It kind of you abruptly lost the ability to, depending on your grade, to receive that funding. And so other than that, all the changes are pretty, they're outlined in the memo from our HR director, are pretty generic and mostly just trying to help promote flexibility in the workplace and to continue to be a attractive place for people to work, to help with future recruitment and retention of current employees long-term. And so we do anticipate, we hate to bring this up often, but we do anticipate sometime within the next 12 months or so, once the Maine's Paid Family Medical Leave Act program is established, we may need to make some tweaks to our personnel policy as well, and how we handle time off and things of that nature. So anticipate those, as well as any other small tweaks that we discover we need to make. Otherwise, we don't anticipate having to make a lot of changes in the future.
Okay. Any comments? Questions?
I'll just say I am quite comfortable with the nursing mothers.
Okay.
Thank you very much for working on that.
Yeah, I'll just note, I also noticed that change. I did have a couple questions that, just one of which was on the nursing mothers. The last sentence of the area you changed about the breaks still says on packet page 26, the break pay is dependent on exempt and non-exempt status, and I was just curious what that looks like and what that means, because I was a little confused.
So exempt employees are salaried employees, and
Right.
non-exempt are not salaried employees. And so the labor laws surrounding how you handle breaks and stuff for those individuals, so we have to be compliant with the law.
Okay. So I guess I knew what the term exempt, non-exempt meant. It was just more a question about how the pay would work in relation to that, but it sounds like we're just following state statute.
Yeah, we'd just be
okay.
following that in relation to the breaks. And as I shared at our last meeting, the goal is to be as flexible as possible with everyone surrounding this.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. Only other couple comments. I know we added some changes to choices for retirement contributions for folks. If people choose to enroll in the main PERS option, outside of the firefighters, which I know are a totally separate situation for main PERS, but are we doing a match similar to how we are with the other option?
Yeah, so there is a match that's a little bit higher than the max match, but there's also a higher employee contribution.
Okay.
And so they would only, it's what's called a defined benefit plan, so the rate is set by the Maine Public Employees Retirement System. So whatever they tell us the rate is for the employee and the employer, those would be set, and that's what people have to contribute. And that has been a recruitment tool, a recruitment challenge that we found for a couple of reasons. One, it helps with employee retention, as employees do need to become vested in order to be able to maintain that retirement. And then two, if we want to try to recruit anyone from existing municipalities, most of which offer this type of plan, it's hard for people to come to make a move to a town that doesn't offer that. In fact, we lost some applicants with the clerk's position in years past, in the year or so past, as well as our accountant position, who they thought about participating in interview processes and then decided to withdraw because they didn't want to make that change in their retirement. Mm-hmm. And so this will just allow us to help be more competitive. It doesn't mean everybody's going to jump over to it or everybody's going to be on it. And so we have budgeted a little bit for it in the budget that I'll be presenting. And so if someone decides to switch or things of that nature, they'll be offset in the budget. But then next year, one of the huge benefits to ClearGov, our new budgeting software, allows us to designate what each employee has and what their rate is. We can budget more precisely, and that's actually helped us to recognize some budget savings. And so we'll be able to next year budget more precisely based on who is enrolled and who isn't enrolled in that program. And the same thing would apply to the health insurance buyout that we proposed as well, which is a flexibility.
Oh, okay, yeah, that was gonna be my
Yeah.
next question. What kind of, what are the budgetary impacts for just allowing that buyout to happen for people that aren't currently utilizing health insurance? So,
It'd be a significant budgetary savings.
Okay.
So we won't be able to recognize those savings until we know who and when can participate in that program. But
Okay.
it's 30% of the single premium.
Right, I saw
And
that.
so it's, right now, we pay 80% of the single premium, so it would be a significant savings and allow for more compensation for the employee if they
Right.
have a spouse and they, as part of it, they're not just able to opt out, they have to provide evidence that they have insurance, because we want to provide insurance, we want to ensure everybody's covered.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful context as I was reading it. And then just one other small thing. On packet page 65, we have a chart for various types of leave. There's charts here. But we have one for sick time where it outlines the payout amounts for based on years of accrual, which we are updating this policy to reflect that only applies to certain employees that had tenure here at a certain date. So I just want to make sure we update the chart to reflect.
Okay, yeah, the language was updated.
Yeah,
so
I know the language was correct. It's
apologize
just-
that that
No,
got
that's
missed.
fine. I just want to point it
Yeah,
out.
good catch.
Yeah, so, which it shouldn't affect how we vote because it's just putting the language in both places,
Yeah.
but, yeah. Those were my questions. Did anyone else have any?
I think
Oh,
Dan
Dan,
has-
I keep missing your hand. Sorry, go right ahead.
It's okay, Krista, thank you. Yeah, I think with pending the chart update, I would support it. You know, it's a large document, there's a lot of things in it. Not everyone's going to agree with everything, but to Michael's point, and it's clear that John put a tremendous amount of work in this, and I'm sure Michael had a hand in it too. So it's a real improvement over what we had. The federal government recently changed the law that affected people's pensions who worked in the Social Security side of things, but then perhaps took a job with the state or local government. It happened to me when I retired. There used to be a penalty whereby they would reduce your Social Security by a certain amount based on what you got from the main state retirement plan. That penalty's kind of gone away, which I'm hoping might ease, some of the crunch for attracting new people, because people from the private sector who might be interested in working in local or state government won't get penalized now with regards to their pension. So I know it's kind of an aside from this, but it's one more thing I think that hopefully will help a little bit. But it's nice to have this all buttoned up, and given where we've come from, this is a super improvement. So thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good point, Dan. Thank you. Go ahead, Levi.
So I was waiting to see, at least on the nursing mothers, what Ann and Krista had to say about it. But I especially feel good about knowing that Ann had all the input in getting into its current form. So that removes that kind of hurdle for me. The one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit about was the buyout. And I'm, in general, a big fan of that health insurance buyout. But I think and I'm sure there's probably some other document of where you're basing that savings on. I just wish I could have seen that, because on its face, if you just start offering it, you're going to start paying, but you have to, it's predicated on people switching away from that and the savings in that respect. But if every single employer was offering it, at some point it just becomes, more money out the door. So I just wish I could have seen that piece of it.
Yeah, we didn't analyze that because we don't know if and who would participate.
Right.
So I think what happens is a lot of families will evaluate what employer offers a better insurance and things of that nature. I know sometimes the public sectors have better than the private sector, so people typically stay on. But sometimes if someone works for two public sectors, they might evaluate between the two. So I think ultimately, otherwise we do have employees that they have two insurances. And so that's unnecessary, but they do it so that way they do the primary one and the secondary one covers anything that's not paid. And so that's unnecessary premiums that one employer is paying that they don't necessarily. So I'm not sure what the true impact will be until we are able to offer it and see what employees are willing to participate on. Most of our full-time employees all participate, so I think if any of them decide to take advantage of this program and they're on family coverage or employee with spouse or employee with children, the savings is going to be even more drastic than it is just for the single coverage.
Yeah, it certainly can be, and that's why I was just wondering if we had that additional information, which, I haven't obviously dug into that. But yeah, I mean, on its face, I've always been a fan of the buyout, but I think there's going to come a point eventually where more and more employers start to offer that buyout, and then the pendulum kind of swings potentially. But
We can evaluate it over time to see what its impact is.
Yeah, along with that, one of the things I know the school department went to a few years ago is that you're required to, if your spouse is offered insurance, they have to take that instead of being on our program because of the cost. And I think as we're looking through budgets, it's something that we may want to look at some point in time because it is significant cost. I've done this. I sit down every year and look at both my wife's and mine and find out which one makes more sense. And I wish I was offered a buyout because I would take it in a heartbeat, but I'm not. But I just think this is going to be a significant cost over the next few years. It's just and I'm okay with the buyout. I am okay with it as long as it is in writing saying that they have to have insurance. That's the big thing for me because a lot of young people would opt not to get it just to get the funds, and that's not the purpose of insurance.
I'll just say, as someone who's struggled with shifting employer health insurance in the last year based on just my personal situations, that not everyone is even offering affordable insurance as an employer anymore. So the fact that we even have that as a benefit for people is a huge bonus. So I'm happy to support people's health insurance needs however they receive it, and they shouldn't lose benefits based on not taking it. So I'm definitely in support of it.
And I did have one more question. And the way I read this is that we pay 80% of everything, not just the employees, right? That's significant.
Yeah. Okay, any other thoughts on this? Just pending the amendment on the chart, I think we're all comfortable with it.
If that's a friendly amendment,
Yeah,
I'll make sure
that's
that's
fine.
just a text. And then one of the other things is we'll put the date that it's enacted
Yeah.
and by what the council order is, so that way people can reference the changes in the future.
Right, and I just want to reiterate what Dan said about just thanks to you and John for all this work. I know it's a lot to update these documents.
Yeah, and we appreciate your support.
Okay, so I will go to vote. Mike?
Yes.
Levi?
yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Yeah,
Dan?
sorry, yes.
Okay, great. And I'm also
Dan,
yes.
Still too close for me.
Okay, that is unanimous. Okay, next up is Order 2425-17, Professional Services Agreement for Code Enforcement Officer. Looking for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second?
Let me just read the motion, but thank you. Be it ordered that the Gray Town Council hereby authorizes the town manager to sign the amended and restated professional services agreement for a code enforcement officer between the town of North Yarmouth and the town of Gray. And made the motion, Levi seconded. Is there any public comment on this agenda item? Seeing no public comment, so I'll just open it up for council conversation. Mike, if you'd like to.
Yeah, if I may
start
just
us
quickly
off.
introduce the item. As the council will recall, around this time last year, or spring of last year, the town of North Yarmouth had a vacancy in their code enforcement officer position and was eager to have a temporary solution in place to try to support them. And that solution has worked outstandingly well, thanks to our code enforcement officer, Tammy Munson, and her staff, as well as the town of North Yarmouth and their staff. And so working with town manager Diane Barnes, it was a desire of their council to continue this service and hers to continue this service. And so we crafted this revised, restated agreement. That the major change is that the agreement will continue until either party terminates, and that around budget season, the town of Gray will provide the town of North Yarmouth a cost estimate for these services. As part, for the last fiscal year, the cost for these services was $40,000, and we increased that, a 10% increase to $44,000, and they were supportive of that, and those revenue, those monies count as a revenue in our budget, in the intergovernmental revenues of our budget, so we're able to increase that revenue to support some existing staff. So it has worked out very well on our end, and everyone's been able to be serviced and not had any conflicts and help things happen in North Yarmouth. North Yarmouth is also had kind of a tick up in development that they don't have anymore in the future, so they will actually wrap up a lot of things that they have, and it'll just be kind of day-to-day stuff, minor stuff, rather than large-scale development that they had experienced in a couple in the last couple of years. So we've helped them close out some of those projects, and then we'll be continuing to support them on the day-to-day with these services. So we look forward to continue to working with North Yarmouth and appreciate the council's support on this.
Thank you. I'll just say that I think anytime we can find opportunities to kind of do some mutual aid type work or cost savings with like a regional lens, I think it makes a lot of sense. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, Anne?
Yeah, I somehow missed this, I guess, in the last agreement, but I was looking at packet page 74, and it's the list of services to be provided by the code enforcement officer. And I just was surprised to see that under P, it says fulfill the duties of the position of town health officer, and under T, fulfill the duties of the position of E911 officer. And I just thought those were kind of outside the purview of code enforcement officers, even in our town, and I'm not sure why we would do that for North Yarmouth.
Those are two responsibilities that fall under the code enforcement officer in
Oh,
our
no
town
kidding.
and in towns across the state.
So could you just, I mean, I'm sorry, I understand this is pretty well baked and I plan to support it, but I mean, what does it mean to say fulfill the duties of the position of an E911 officer? What's
So the
entailed in that?
E911 officer ultimately is, they make sure addresses comply with E911 standards. And that means the numbering and the street names and everything needs to be clear, and like you can't have a main street off of, West Main Street, or, different
Yeah.
things. There's different standards as far as addressing for, when someone calls 911, it's easy to find. So you can't have two streets named with the same thing.
Right.
So it's really a code enforcement officer function that they handle when someone makes application for a building permit, for
Okay,
say like
that makes sense.
a new residence or a business. So it's kind of part of their regular duties. And then the health officer position is just a designated position that the CDC can reach out to if there's a public health emergency in a community. That typically is, supported by all town staff, but it's just a designated person that's usually consistent in various communities. Sometimes there's a member of the public safety departments that might be designated as a health officer, but here in Gray, it's been designated as the code enforcement
Oh,
officer.
okay, I didn't
And
know
it's, sometimes they're interchanged between the two, but it's just, so like, when we got notices of, there was some bird flus that we had this summer, they typically sent the notice to both the code enforcement officer and myself as the town manager, because in a lot of towns, the town manager, smaller towns, serves as the code enforcement
Sure,
officer as well,
sure.
or at least a point person with like maybe a consultant. So those are typically the responsibilities. It's not like they're going to help solve a public health crisis,
Right, okay,
or
that makes me feel better.
be handling 911 broad 911 duties. They're very simple.
Okay, that helps, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And I have a little input to when they came down and offered to plow Ramsdale Road. There were never numbers on the homes. And part of the deal with the town was that we had to work with code enforcement to get every house to have a number, because mail doesn't obviously get delivered down there. Everyone has a post office or whatever. So as you take over, camp roads, things like that, that typically haven't in the past had those numbers. 911 needed to know how to get down there.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
that was
makes
part of
sense.
the deal.
Yeah, that's good. Sounds appropriate.
Dan?
Thanks, Krista. Yeah, I mean, in years past, before Michael, Nate was the public health
That's what I thought, yeah.
officer for the town. And Mike, just a clarifying question. Our assessor used to be the 911 officer. Has that kind of changed and I've missed that?
I don't think it's changed. I think it might be kind of like a shared function.
Yeah,
but
okay.
I think code enforcement, it falls on code enforcement a lot, like I said, because it relates to building permits and applications, where
Okay.
assessing doesn't deal with that as much.
And then my only other question was, besides the dollar amount, were there any other changes in this contract that you wanted to point out?
The dollar amount and the fact that it's restated to be an ongoing arrangement. Those were the only changes, and this was already approved by the North Yarmouth
yeah.
Select Board
Yeah.
last month, and we had it approved by them before bringing it to you guys.
Sounds good, thank you.
I did have one question, Mike. When it comes to the dollar amount, I see the increase. When we originally came up, because I wasn't here when we originally did this, the $40,000, I think you said it was in the past, how did we determine that number?
So Tahan, quite frankly, let me know what she had budgeted for it, and based on the estimated amount of hours, we decided to determine a portion of that to help her identify savings in her budget and also help us with savings in our budget. And so that was ultimately kind of how it was determined. And ultimately, it'll helps fund a percentage of our code enforcement office. So it's a revenue in addition to other things like permits and things like that essentially help offset the cost of running a code enforcement office.
The only concern I have is that it seems a little low if we look in the fact that, let's say, 10 hours, it's a quarter of someone's work week. As we just discussed a minute ago, sick time, time off, not 401k, but whatever we call it here, all that stuff is part of a salary. And is this applicable? Is this, are we getting, the value, in my opinion? And that concerns me, with some of these things, because, if we could do this with another town, we should take advantage of this, because it doesn't seem like it's, the same proportionate of the overall cost for this position.
Well, we have 3 code enforcement officers, 1 full-time and 2 part-time. And so I don't think there would be any town in or near us that could that could support us in that sense. But I think it's a fair figure. If the council wants me to try to get more money, I know they've already started their budget process in North Yarmouth, but I think maybe in future years, if you want to, increase it significantly, or we can continue to step it up. I thought, stepping it up with a 10% increase annually for this year seemed fair, and that's probably what I would consider in the years ahead as costs continue to escalate.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Mike, because I had forgotten that was another question I had. Is that the sort of fully loaded hourly cost or something for those positions? And it does seem like it would be kind of somewhat appropriate to pass that cost on to North Yarmouth for the hours that those personnel spend there. Maybe not. I mean, I think I'm willing to not get into that for this year, but just going forward.
And so is there like a percentage of our total budget or something that you're considering?
No, I was really just looking for the analysis. I mean, just, if there's the fully loaded cost would be, their wage, their salary, and as well as, any kind of sick time or leave time or training costs, things like that. And so whatever that one of those individual positions would cost us, and I recognize there are differentials between Tammy, for example, and the part-time staff, but maybe come up with some average of that, and then just use that fully loaded cost.
Yeah, I think if we were to change the cost much significantly, they would probably consider to hire somebody, and they wouldn't utilize us, because they had budgeted a position with pay and benefits was around $75,000, and so this is just a little over half of what they previously had budgeted, and we're only using
25%.
You know,
Yeah.
25% of that. And in fact, you know, there's weeks where we might only do 4 hours, and there's weeks we only do 9. Like, so they're not nickel and diming us, and we're not
Okay.
tracking every second of it. And so they also pay for mileage, that was in the agreement to begin with. They pay for mileage for our staff to drive there. If staff uses their own vehicles, they get that reimbursement. If we use the town vehicle, the town gets that reimbursement for mileage. And so, you know, there are other, you know, aspects of it that we receive, but it's definitely seems like, you know, a win-win for everyone of how I structured it.
Yeah.
So if the town wants to charge them more, I'm fairly confident that they'd probably consider just hiring their own employee.
Yeah, that might be the case, and in which case we'd have more availability of them in gray, but we wouldn't have their, the benefit of their, you know, helping to offset our employee costs. I guess the last question I have is, do we, I mean, you said they're not nickel and diming us, but do we know that it's, you know, that we're not exceeding that 10 hours a week or what, roughly what it is? I mean, are we tracking that as well?
Yeah, we know
Okay.
for sure. If
Okay.
we were consistently, you know, if we have one week where it's because of an extra situation or whatever, they spend 12 or 15 hours, you know, that might, but if we were consistently investing more time and our office had to, you know, was affected operationally, things of that nature, then we would consider an adjustment in handling what we do. They also provide, they have administrative support for this position that they provide for. So their, you know, scheduling and things of that nature is not necessarily handled by our staff. It's just handled by them. So we just provide the inspection services and the services that are outlined as part of the agreement.
Okay, great, thanks.
Dan?
Thanks, Krista. Yeah, Mike, just a curiosity question. Is Tammy the only one that goes to North Yarmouth, or do any of our folks go over there?
They all do.
They all do. Okay.
Yep, all depends on scheduling and availability and expertise. We have some code enforcement officers that are more experts in plumbing and septic versus, you know, framing and insulation and things of that nature. So, you know, they all have all the experience, but some of them are better than others, and we try to do what's appropriate.
Yeah, whoever's
But Tammy
needed,
does
but
go down
okay.
there quite a bit, but otherwise for inspections, you know, an inspector might be out on the road doing other inspections, and they drive 5 minutes over the line, conduct an inspection, and come back. They don't necessarily have to go to Yarmouth's town office and report in or anything of that nature. So that's usually how we try to schedule them.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for that information.
Levi?
I think the number's pretty good. I'm just looking at the variability of the hours. I mean, there's probably not, my initial thought at least, there wasn't much. You know, you could really increase it without their tolerance. So it just seems like a pretty solid number overall to me.
Yeah. I would agree. I mean, it's essentially approximately 25% of a position's time, and it's, if they were budgeting, would you say 75,000 for a full-time? I mean, I think that seems reasonable. You mentioned that we have the option of renegotiating during budget season. I just didn't see that in the language here. Do you know what section that was in?
Just find that.
I probably just missed it, but I see when the rate increases might be implemented with the beginning on July 1st, but I didn't.
We had it in there. I forget what section it was in.
Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I just was having a hard time finding it.
Oh, right here, it says, however, that Gray shall provide North Yarmouth with notice of such rate increase no later than February 1st,
Okay,
with such rate increase to be implemented on July 1, the first date of the next fiscal year.
Yeah,
okay.
makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I just should have read that whole sentence when I found the July 1st date. Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that was in there because I think that's important going forward, since we will not be revisiting this as a resolution every year.
And it
so-
says this flat rate may be increased in Gray's sole discretion, provided that those dates that I outlined.
Okay, that's great. Any other final thoughts? Okay, I will go to vote. Anne?
Yes.
Levi?
Yes.
Mike?
No.
Dan?
Yes.
And I'm a yes, so that passes. Okay, I will move on to order number 2425-18, authorization of waiver of foreclosure. So I'm looking for a motion be ordered that the Gray Town Council hereby authorizes the recording of a waiver of foreclosure for the attached list of real estate accounts as recommended by the finance director.
So moved.
Second.
Levi motioned, Mike second. Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this agenda item? No, I'm just going to close public comment. No one from the public here to comment, so I'll open it up for conversation. Yeah, Mike, could you just give us an overview of what's...
Yeah, I'll just give you a
about?
brief
Yeah.
description of what we're doing here. I know councilors who have been here in the past are familiar. In years past, this wasn't done last year with the transition in staff, but basically we evaluate all the fiscal year tax liens, and there's an automatic foreclosure date associated with those, and we evaluate the properties to see if any of them are essentially liabilities for the town. And so we're working slowly but surely, and we'll work more as part of our refinement and reorganization of our finances, is to begin, working harder to collect delinquent property taxes, and we've been successful at that. But these are properties that are ultimately mobile homes, and therefore, if we're not waiving the money that's due, it's still due, and the folks still owe it, but we're waiving foreclosing on it, because if we take ownership of it, the town would then have to pay rent on the mobile home in the mobile home park. And so in any case, it's appropriate for us to waive, so we don't have any liability, and we're not necessarily responsible for the mobile home to remove it. That's the other thing, we could be required to pay to remove it. So anything without any liability. As you may recall, I think a number of years ago, the town had foreclosed on a property that had a small dump on it, and so the town all of a sudden became liable for that when if they had waived that in the past, they might not have had that liability. So this is something, due diligence we do every year before we do that. Folks are received before this date a final notice, so a lot of them pay up. And so we have a list that was maybe 20 properties long, that's down to maybe 10, and 10 of them are these, a chunk of the 10 are these ones. And so those will be waived. They'll continue to owe those funds, though. So we are going to work with the mobile home park to see about resolving these in the future, but we just want to make sure I have this process done before the date, so we don't become owners of mobile homes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that was going to be my question, is I couldn't recall if we waive this, if the lien would still be applicable, if we could still collect on it. So it
The
sounds,
lien is still applicable.
it sounds like we can.
Yeah, just not foreclosed.
Right, okay. Any other comments? Mike?
Yeah, so I do have, since the mobile home park pays taxes themselves as well, right? And we could potentially own, was it 8 properties here? And now mobile homes are actually worth quite a bit of money. That, $30, $40, $50, $60,000, even a not so great one now. Is there a way to make it so that the park itself is responsible? Because, we're taxing property tax, even though it's a leased property. Is there a way around that, I guess, legally, to make the, so that we don't have to pay the fees, make the mobile home park responsible?
Well, we don't pay any fees. All the fees are applied to the lien, so registry fees and things of that nature, but
Yeah.
the park doesn't legally own the units. So if the person is delinquent with the park, then the park has methods of how they can evict people through those procedures, but they don't legally own the unit. So if I were to own a mobile home, the park owner can't be responsibility if it's my mobile home, even though I'm not paying the taxes. And so these are one of the more complicated ones in Maine law. There's a number of other properties that we will be foreclosing on that we will begin the process of evaluating, disposal, or give people the opportunity to pay their balance and redeem the property. At the end of the day, it's become very difficult to dispose of properties. At one time, the municipality could receive a property, dispose of it, and keep all the proceeds. Now there's a much more detailed record-keeping process due to a recent Supreme Court case and law change where the town has to return the proceeds from the sale and keep track of all their administrative costs. And unfortunately, we don't have the staff time to get into the real estate business right now, so we let a lot of these stay on the books, and we'll begin tackling those to try to ultimately get folks who owe the money to redeem the property and pay for it. I went through an exercise in another community I worked for where they had foreclosures dating back as 20 years, and a couple of $1 million in unpaid taxes. And when you finally get serious about the collection and you exercise all the responsibilities under the law that you have, people typically pay. And at the end of the day, you can go through that exercise and eventually they'll pay when it gets to the end. When you get ready to have a realtor put a for sale sign on the property or something like that, they eventually get paid. But we'll work with the property, the mobile home park, to see what we can do. These aren't huge balances on these because their values are small and the taxes are, but if the mobile home is going to take over, we want to make sure those are transferred over. But we should be able to get these cleared up. But this is something that has been done annually in the past.
When I first read this, my first thought was, are we subjecting ourselves to liability? And let's say I haven't paid my taxes and you start to foreclose on my property and we're waiving this. Can I come back to you? I come back to the town and say, well, you didn't foreclose on mine? Isn't there an issue there that, if I'm not, I can't, you can either do it for everybody or for nobody. That's kind of, at least in my mind.
We're not waiving it for people. We're waiving it so the town doesn't have a liability. So your home, land, any other home has value, and the town is guaranteed to collect outstanding property taxes because we can keep that property or we can dispose of it. And if we want to keep it, we still have to evaluate the cost. But this is something that towns typically do, municipalities do under the law when there's an associated value. So I think it's all allowed under the law, so I don't think there's anybody that says, your house can be foreclosed on and we can choose not to sell it and say we're gonna work with you to have a payment plan and get caught up and ultimately redeem your property. Otherwise, that's the best process to go. Otherwise, we go through the process of selling it. And if someone's living in it, it makes it complicated because we have to evict them and things of that nature. So it's in our best interest to try to work with people. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're guaranteed to get the money after it's all said and done, and any costs associated with what we incur to deal with that.
Dan?
Thanks, Krista. Mike, just a couple of questions. All of these properties are lien, so that goes back to what you're saying about the fact that the town ultimately will end up getting the money and the costs for putting the liens on and everything else. You said that you're in the process of assessing other properties that could be foreclosed on to decide what we want to do. Is there a way that we could assess these too? I appreciate the fact that, we don't want to foreclose on property that becomes a liability for the town. But if there's an opportunity to actually foreclose on some of these properties because it wouldn't be a liability for the town, is that something you're considering?
They automatically foreclose.
Okay.
All the other properties that have unpaid property taxes and are liened as from their liens are maturing in fiscal year 23, they automatically foreclose. So we're not asking to waive them and we're not asking permission. By law, they automatically foreclose. So what we'll do is, as we evaluate disposal, if they're properties that we take possession of, we'll come to the town council, likely an executive session, to discuss disposing of real estate. And if we agree to dispose of properties, then in public session, the council will take action on a list of properties to dispose of, and you'll authorize us to put properties for sale and recover the costs outstanding. like I said, it would be our goal, that's a very labor-intensive process. It'd be our goal to try to work with people to pay the taxes and redeem the properties.
Yeah, it hasn't happened often, but it's, I'm glad that we've got this extra step in the process now to, protect the town's interests as far as not taking possession of property that would end up being a liability to the town. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Kristen?
Yep. Go
Yeah,
ahead, Ann.
I want to echo that. Thanks for paying attention to this and having your eye on this ball, because that hasn't always been the case. And I appreciated the questions, because I think that helped me understand this a bit more, because we, in fact, haven't really talked a lot about this in the past. But I wondered if you could, so and I understand it's a labor-intensive process, so perhaps you haven't gotten into it with these 8 manufactured units, but what is the relative cost of the past due liens, past due tax liens, relative to the value of the properties and the past due lot rent? I mean, that seems like I can appreciate that not wanting to take on the lot rent is a good idea. That's probably smart, as long as the owners of those units understand that they still owe those taxes and should continue to work with the town to make sure they're paid and paid going forward. That we're not, I think people perceive this as an issue of fairness, the property taxpayers in town, and they're not going to want to see people get kind of a pass on taxes that aren't, a pass that's not available to everybody else. So I guess I'm just sort of making sure that we're going to stay on that, and I'm not sure whose job that is. I mean, sort of, you talk about this being a resource issue, but I mean, is that your job?
Well, so ultimately, it's a responsibility of the tax collector, which is
Okay,
a position that
yeah.
I'm designated as, but that has responsibilities been designated to our finance
Okay.
staff. And as folks know, the finance staff has been grossly understaffed for a number of years, so we're finally getting up to staff. And to be able to tackle more of these, I think it just will take us time to sit down. And so these people aren't getting a pass. They still owe all this money, and nobody's going to get a pass of what they owe. But we'll be, for instance, when we went through this list, one of the properties, there was a property that was confusing. There was the land, and because we were considering waiving it, the land and the building were taxed separately. Well, we learned they shouldn't have been. And a quick call to the property owner, or called to the property, who then gave us a phone number to the property owner, and they showed up this week with a check for $12,000 to pay outstanding taxes. So we just have to have the time to go through that
Yeah,
exercise and make phone calls and knock on doors and do different things. At the end of the day, all these things are filed in the Registry of Deeds, so it's all documented and all the town's protected. But if we want to try to get these off our books and get these taxes collected, and ultimately they're accounts receivables for the town, so the town still owed it and still accounts for it. We raise money for it, we spend budgets for it, the percentage of these. So ultimately, everyone's responsible, and will work to be more aggressive about collection efforts. I think as we get to the point of following the law, which is what we're doing now, and then we get to the point of giving people the appropriate notices necessary to say, hey, we're gonna sell your property. We give somebody a 90-day notice that we're gonna sell their property. They'll typically, take care of it eventually.
Yeah.
And properties that have mortgages, typically the mortgage holder will pay
Right.
the taxes.
Right.
And so then they deal with it.
Yep.
They could work on collecting it from the property owner. And we don't have to, but properties that don't have mortgages are usually the ones that get in this list. It's not like we have hundreds of properties. We have a good number of properties, and it hasn't been dealt with as aggressively in the past, and it'll be my goal. At the end of the day, the town's been protected, all the documents are filed, and so the money's set aside. It's just whether it's the hottest fire to fight or not.
Sure, yeah.
And ultimately, we know we're gonna get the money, so if we can deal with some of the more critical issues first, and then deal with some of these less critical issues in the future.
Right, so I mean, so let's say somebody just, for whatever reason, can't pay, and eventually they sell, the property is sold, that's the point at which we would get reimbursed,
Yeah.
right? the
Yeah,
back
we
taxes.
automatically will get paid because they
Right.
can't, nobody could get clear title for purchasing.
Without
a
settling
property
that,
without
right.
settling
So I
it.
just wanted, I mean, I think I understand that, but I just wanted to make sure that people understood that's the mechanism for folks who, for whatever reason, are just not in a position to pay their back taxes, but we will ultimately recoup those costs. So I just want to make
Yeah.
sure people understand that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Mike. Any final thoughts?
Nope.
Okay, I'll go to vote. Ann,
Yes.
Levi,
Yes.
Mike,
No.
Dan,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. Okay, that passes. So I will move on to our second round of public comments. Is there anyone who'd like to make a comment? Come on up.
It's me again about the Community Day. So Lisa tried to get on Microsoft Teams and couldn't.
Okay.
And I said, I'm coming in person because I don't want to not get on. So she couldn't get on, and she wanted to thank you for designating the third Sunday in May. So I appreciate that. This is just as a resident, and I've been here before about this topic. Have you guys talked about the volunteer award process and an event and a gathering?
We're working on scheduling one for this spring.
Yay! Okay, good.
Yeah. Thank you
Thank
for
you
the
for bringing
reminder on
that
that.
up.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
just, it's kind of fell off our radar with all the transitions happening, but we need to get back to recognizing our volunteers for sure.
Actually,
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, Michael and I were talking about this just this past week, so it hasn't fallen off the radar. It's on the list.
Okay.
Great.
And
Good.
Brett is helping me working on it, and we're working on dates and menus and gifts and things of that.
Oh,
nature.
okay, great. You're farther along than I would have guessed.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you all for doing that. Okay, doesn't look like we have any referrals to discuss, and so I'm looking for a motion for the Greytown Council to enter into executive session under MRSA Title I, Chapter 13, 405.6.a to discuss personnel matters.
I'd like to make a motion.
All right, have a second?
One second.
Mike made the motion and seconded. Just as a note, the session will be including the town council and the town manager. No decisions will be made, and the executive session will adjourn following the conclusion of the executive session. Okay, so I'll go to a vote. Mike?
Yes.
Levi?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Dan? You're muted, Dan.
I think you said yes.
Sorry, yes.
Yes, and I'm also a yes. So we will adjourn into executive session. Thank you.